Obrigado. Vamos dar continuidade, então, pessoal, com o Caridy, que vai apresentar a próxima palestra aqui pra gente. Divirta-se. Tá falando?
Tudo bom? So for me, it's always fun to come to Brazil. I have visited this country multiple times now, and every time is just a joy. For me, it's amazing. And when I look back, I remember first time that I acknowledged Brazilian talent was in 2000, when Google won the first, for the first time, the year-end tournament for tennis. I'm a big fan of tennis. And since then, I actually has been very lucky to be able to work and to meet many of Brazilian people, very talented people. And that's why we keep coming here. That's why we are here, actually. Just to be able to share with you and to meet you. So pretty excited to be here again. And it's always fun to come to Brazil. Every time that I come, I learn something new. In my last trip, I learned about cerveja do Brasil. Especially that big bottle that you have, that you share. And I learned that if you actually share, you actually share multiple beers, you ended up speaking in Portuguese. I don't know how. And to prove it, I have a picture here. I was with my friend Stoyan, who is coming next. And I learned also another thing, that you should not share the beer with Stoyan. So I have a very peculiar name. My Brazilian friends, they call me Caridy Patino. I guess Patino is something funny here, but I'm not so sure. And I have this fancy title at Yahoo, but mostly what I do at Yahoo is JavaScript all day long. I work for the YUI team, and probably some of you know about it because Alloy from LiveRate is based on YUI. We do have other products. We have Mojito, which is an application framework for Node, and probably the inspiration for this talk, even though I will not talk about Mojito specifically. And the new one that we just launched few months ago is a pure CSS, which is an application, a kind of boilerplate for CSS. But today I want to talk about NodeJS, and specifically about the good things about this amazing platform that has been growing so fast in the last 2 years. It's amazing. And I just want to talk about some of the bad things about the platform. There is always a bad thing, and also some of the ugly things. But my goal today is more about highlighting those things where Node.js really excel, where Node.js can do really good for production quality products, and the things that it doesn't. Hopefully, we'll get to transmit that message. And also, I want you to talk about the things that you should potentially avoid doing in Node.js. And this is obviously based on our opinions and based on our experience using Node.js, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad for everyone, or you should really avoid to do it. If you feel confident, you should use it. And most important, and this is the bit that I really want to stress today, most important is the things that you have to keep in mind when you are using Node.js. Because sometimes you don't know very well the platform that you're using. And this is not only for Node.js, but other platforms as well. But if you know the limitation of the platform, you are better off during the design phase of your program. So you will be probably escaping some of the traps that many of us has already get into. So many people keep talking about why Node, why many people are excited about it. Personally, I think is just evolutionary step for JavaScript, and for me has been a fresh air. I have been doing front-end development for a long time, mostly on the client, and now being able to also extend that to the server and being able to write JavaScript in a controlled environment, which is completely different from writing JavaScript for a browser, which you really don't have too much control of what's going on there, has been really a fun experience. So that's why I think NodeJS is so successful right now. And also the fact that we decide to change all the front-end boxes, or most of the front-end boxes in Yahoo, change them from Apache PHP to Node.js. We started that almost 2 years ago. It's a long shot, but we are getting there. And since then, I have been probably using Node.js on the daily basis. So that's why, for this presentation, what I want to do is to use some examples. And for that, I choose these two types of programs that you can write: network applications and CLI tools. And network application is why Node.js was created. That was the intention behind Node.js. That's why Ryan created in the first place. The CLI tools are just a side effect of that. No one predicted that Node was going to be a player in the CLI tool ecosystem, and it is a player right now. So we'll see some of the details about it. Let's start with the network applications, and people normally ask, what is that? What the hell is network application? Some people call it deployable applications or hosted applications or just simple web application. Doesn't matter much. It's just this program that you write and you push into a server connected to the network, and you have users that use the network to access that application that you just deployed. But not all the network programs and not all of them are the same. And I want to cover two very specific cases. One of them is Node for pipes and API, which is a pretty common use case for Node.js applications. And Node.js does a really great job in this department. So you have to write an API. You have to select one of the platforms. Node.js is really good for it. So we'll see some details about it. First of all, writing a high-performance, high-concurrency network program for accessing data is one of the main use cases for Node. No question about it. That's why Ryan created it in the first place. Although not all these Node.js programs are supposed to be or fulfill that promise. Some of them will probably not be high concurrency or will perform very well. And we will see some details about why. But specifically, I want to also highlight that one of the reasons why Node.js is so good for APIs implementations is because it is just JavaScript. It's so easy for us. If you look into an API, what exactly it is, an example could be a location API that you want to offer, and user will be able to hit that API, and based on the request, you will be able to go and fetch some weather information, probably get some location information for that, also getting local news or something like that. You mash up all that data, you send it to the client. It's pretty basic API. And when you think about it, this is the kind of things that we are doing in the client anyways. So it's natural for us to think about this in terms of JavaScript and to come up with a good design for creating one of these APIs in Node.js. Another very important thing is that is the fact that Node.js has this concept of streams, and it actually offers you a very low-level TCP operation. So you really can get the sense of what's going on at the network level. And this is critical for many APIs, especially for high performance and low latency APIs, things that really will have a lot of traffic, will potentially has a lot of data manipulation and data mashup to produce a response. So historically, platforms like PHP, Java, all the other platforms that we are used to back in the days, hopefully back in the days, they offer you no control at all over what's going on at the network level. And you might say, well, why do I need to control what's going on there? And what exactly can I control when I use Node? It means that when you are interacting with network activities, saying you have a request coming into your server, you have to use that information, you have to go and hit other different APIs that you have internally. Probably those APIs are low latency API to your server, or potentially you have to access a database that is local or in a layer that is pretty close to your front-end box. So you have a very low latency there. But the majority of the user will potentially have a high latency compared with that, which means that it will take more time to pick up, to be able to send all the data that you have in the buffer. So you have to manage that kind of things. Node.js offer a lot of good stuff for manipulating and being able to do more operations at the same time by just pausing some of the users that are running on a high latency network connection and being able to distribute that time into other users and then come back to them and send the rest of the data. So that kind of thing, you can do it in Node.js, especially for APIs that are meant to be serving a lot of traffic. Now, this is a very common mistake that people do when they come to Node.js. And it's usually related with early optimizations. They want to just optimize what they're doing, trying to solve, again, a latency problem. You have cache layers that you want to introduce so you don't have to hit your database every time. You don't have to hit the file system every time. You don't have to hit another internal API every time. What you ended up is adding a cache layer. You just need to be very careful about this because you should not cache at the Node.js level. Remember, Node.js is running on those servers in a form of process that could potentially handle multiple requests at the same time, which means that one of these processes will be potentially handle hundreds of requests or even thousands of requests at the same time. So if each of those requests are adding things to the cache, or the data that you have to cache is actually pretty big compared with the amount of data that you have to transfer and all that, don't do it. Avoid storing anything in the Node.js process. Don't do it. You will see more details later on about this, more details about what kind of things you can do. But mostly, what I recommend in this case is, if you really need to catch the response that you're sending to the client, then just put something in front of it. Put a proxy, a reverse proxy, just to cache that data. So if someone else is asking the exact same data, they will get something from cache. Or just put a layer behind it so you can cache things in Redis or Memcache or whatever, you name it, just to avoid having to go to the file system or to another API or just to a database or something. So those are the techniques that you can apply here, but do not cache at the Node.js level. That's subtle. Don't do it. So another area of concerns when you use Node.js for APIs implementations is if you really need to have sessions, authentication, anything that tell you that for that particular user you have a very specific response that potentially is security aware or should be security aware, you should probably be very careful. Because again, you have a single process, all these requests coming to that process. If you try to store data somehow, and it is related with the previous statement as well, if you try to move data around and store data to use it later on in the event loop, you might be leaking data to the request that you don't want. So be very careful about this. and keep that in mind every time that you have to kind of offer some sort of protected data or access to protected data. So just to recap on this part, so I want to do some checkpoints because this is a lot of information. There is no code in my slides or just a little bit of code. So I just want to make some checks in the middle of the presentation. So this one is what I have been mentioning about APIs implementation. Again, this is about being able to use NodeJS to create a network program that is supposed to offer access to data through an API. So some of the things that you see with the plus is good things about it. Again, just it's very good for high performance and high concurrency APIs. Is probably easier than most of the other platforms that we have out there because of the nature of JavaScript, the asynchronous nature of it. So that's pretty good. The streams and the low-level access to TCP operations, that's also really good if you need it. I will say that if you're using Node.js, at some point you will be using streams, even if you don't know it, because a lot of libraries are actually using streams under the hood. But just keep that in mind that you have the ability to control that kind of things. And then also good is if cache is paramount, you should look for another solution or one of the alternatives that I mentioned. And if you have data that is protected or should be protected, then you probably should be careful about leaking data from one request to another. You don't want to send information that doesn't belong to a particular request. And again, like, the fact that it's really good doesn't mean that you should go crazy about it. So don't create those crazy APIs that are just doing a lot of things at the same time. Try to split it. So the second type of application, network application that I want to mention today is the regular ones. It's probably why you are here. Because you're a web developer, you want to create web applications, you want to create websites or even more complex single-page applications. And this is also one of the main use cases for Node.js. This is why we are looking into Node.js in the first place. And this is also my favorite topic because this is the thing that I have been doing for the last 2 years. And in my opinion, Node.js could be really good at this use case. So I will focus more on the bad things about it because the good things, we know we want to use it. So the first thing that I want to mention here is something that people sometimes just get crazy about it. So don't be shocking about it. But in general, I'll say that creating objects, and I put this creation is instantiation for a class, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a class or something. Just the fact that you are creating objects might be a little bit bad for you. Why? The reason behind it is the garbage collector. The garbage collector, and again, I'm talking about application that will receive a lot of traffic. You have an application that is getting just a little bit of traffic every day, doesn't matter much. But you have a high-performance application that's getting a lot of traffic, like in search, we're getting millions of hits every day. The garbage collector will be something that will be in the middle and something that will affect really the performance of your application. Some people say that a garbage collector is just hunger-based. It will just eat your application alive. And for those who don't know exactly what this is, remember that Node.js used the V8 engine, the JavaScript engine that was created by Google, the one that powers the Chrome browser. We just use it for Node.js to run the JavaScript on the server side. So it's really optimized for the browser. It's not optimized for the server. At least it's not today. And what happened is that whenever you're receiving traffic, you're creating objects. And whenever you finish with each request, those objects are in memory and that memory have to be reclaimed by some process. That process is the garbage collector. The problem with the garbage collector is that in order to go and collect all the objects that are hanging there, no one is referenced them, it's done, they belong to a request that is already closed. The problem is that the whole process has to be freeze. So the garbage collector can go and pick up everything. It cannot do it during the live traffic. It has to stop doing anything on that process just to collect those objects. And freezing that means that anyone who is waiting for the response is on hold until you finish, and then you continue the operations. When you have a massive amount of traffic, this thing is getting nasty because you are holding everyone, and potentially you have a service. For example, we have this application search, Yahoo search, and we were able to render the page, the HTML page that you need with all the response and all that, all the search result, in 100 milliseconds around that, without counting the latency to collect the data that you need. 100 milliseconds is pretty good, but then under heavy traffic, what happened is that it was taking 300 milliseconds just to clean the process, to remove all the objects. So we're talking about 3x the amount that you need, the amount of time that you need to respond. It was taking more than that just to clean that up under heavy traffic. Again, you have a lot of processes that are adding objects to memory, and those objects need to be reclaimed at some point. So this is really nasty thing. The solution is really simple. Runtime logic should be based on functions. And I'll try to explain this a little bit for you. But most important, we have seen this trend in the last few months, last year or so, is that JavaScript is a functional language. It's supposed to be using functions. So whenever you try to create complex structure, abstractions, classes, inheritance, all that, you are just adding complexity to it. And when it comes to creating a complex application that has all these classes, all these subjects that you have to create just to be able to respond to a request, you are adding a lot of overhead to it. And Angus mentioned the technique called mixing. It might make sense for you to look into it when it comes to writing programs for Node. It's potentially helping you instead of just going and creating those crazy objects everywhere and this crazy inheritance. So that's the main point about the garbage collector. It had to be driven by functions, so make sure that you look at it. The good thing and the good news is that Express, how many of you have used Express at some point? Yeah, all the others should start looking at it. Express is really good. So they really, I don't know if TJ knew about this. TJ is the creator of Express. I don't know if he knew about it, but he got it right. This thing is really good. It doesn't create any objects other than two objects whenever a request comes in, a request and response object. And even though you have the flexibility to go and add more objects, it encourages you to use this concept of middleware, which is just a function that receives request and response object, and it will augment it, do something, and respond to it. So this is the technique that you should follow when you are creating a web application for the server. Keep that in mind. Another exciting thing about Node.js and web application, and we have seen this trend also in the last year or so, is that you can also write a program that is an application, but in reality what you're doing is packaging or producing a bunch of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can use it to push your application into a phone, for example, to put it in the App Store, or just to push it to your server and have a simple HTML application running on your server, even though you create an infrastructure or a framework just to generate that website. This is really good for not data-driven applications, saying you are not very data intensive. You don't need a lot of data. Like, for example, a blog. You don't write a blog every hour. You probably don't write a blog post every day. So why do you need to have a Node.js server running just to serve those pages? It's probably better just to generate those HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and you will be better off. No security issues, no garbage collector problems if you have a lot of traffic, if you're lucky. So that's the kind of things that you have to keep in mind. There are other things that you can do with Node.js. It's not strictly creating a program that you will push to a server. And this is getting a lot of traction right now. There are around 5 different libraries or frameworks that are targeting this market, where you create this application that you can push to a server, or you can compile to a simple web application that you can put into phone app, for example, and put it into different devices and so on. So another recap on the web application, so we can jump into the second part of the presentation. Again, creating web application is one of the primary cases for NodeJS. So it's really good at it. There is this concept that you can also go and share logic. It's the same JavaScript. It's the same way of doing things. So probably you can even get to the point where you can share part of the logic between server and client. We have seen also a few other frameworks that are targeting the market. Mojito is one of them, the one that I mentioned at the beginning. It's also easy to generate package. You need to have that kind of functionality. It's also growing really fast in terms of modules for web applications specifically. We are seeing a huge growth there. People adding more and more libraries that can potentially work on the server as well. All these underscores, everything that you normally use on the client, now you are seeing some of these going into the server. But you have to be careful. They were created for the browser, which is not the same. So make sure that you choose the libraries that you're going to use on the server side. The not so good things is obviously object creation abstraction, which is going to bite you at some point. And obviously controlling memory and trying to debug it is freaking hard. And again, this is using V8, which means that whatever tools Google come up with and put it into Chrome to help you to debug memory and garbage collectors, everything that you have in the browser, you can potentially use that with Node.js. You just need to use some tools just to pipe it. But in general, the way to find really big problems in terms of memory and all that is really difficult, because most of them surface only when you are under heavy traffic, which is really difficult to control. So we are not there yet in terms of tooling, but hopefully we can get to that in the next year. So the next part of the presentation is about the CLI tools, and yeah, we will have time for question at the end. But the CLI tools is just the command line tool, the commands that you write in your terminal. And sometimes people are even using those commands and they don't even know what they are. So a CLI tool is just this program that you execute in your terminal, and you can write that program in Node.js if you want. You normally will write it in Batch or whatever language you decide. Historically, we have few languages that are very good at it, but Node is catching up, and we have seen a lot of people using Node.js for writing CLI tools. So let's see why exactly Node is getting traction there. This is an example of how you install a CLI in any machine. You can just do npm install and the name of the package that you want to install, and if that package comes with a CLI, you get that new command. In this case, I'm just installing Mojito CLI, so you will be able to just, after that, use the new command called Mojito to do something with it. And we've seen that with almost every presentation has used some sort of npm in their slides, which means that we are doing great in that department. We are getting a lot of packages that are actually providing CLI tools as part of the package. The first and most important, and people don't even think about it, is the fact that Node.js is platform agnostic, which means that you should be able to use it in potentially multiple platforms. Whatever program you write in Node.js, it might potentially work on different platforms. That's important, even though it's not the primary goal when you write a CLI, I will say. People really, in many cases, they don't really care about Windows, or they don't really care about Unix-based system, which is potentially what we have at hand today. So Node.js kind of work on almost every platform out there. And we have seen fancy toys and new hardware that already comes with JavaScript and Node.js. We have seen that in the last year as well, getting a lot of traction. But this really comes down to obviously Windows, Mac, Linux, or any Unix-based system that we use as a developer. So if you are a developer, you probably use a lot of CLI tools. And it comes down to that. And although when we talk about multi-platforms in the context of Node.js, what comes to our mind is just this, the Windows versus Unix. And when it comes to CLI tools, you do a lot of file system operations, probably. It comes down to slash versus backslash. Or how some other people call it, the write slash and the run slash. I don't know if I agree. But the thing that I do know is that these guys, the Node.js team, they put a lot of effort to really thinking about how to enable people to write programs in such a way that it's easy to get that program to run in other platforms without pushing that into the user land. What does this mean? It means that you really don't have to pay too much attention to it, and potentially you are ready to run your program in a different platform. The trick is to follow few very simple rules. I will try to cover some of them. But the reason why it is so good is that because you don't have to think too much about it, you don't get into a fragmentation platform like other platforms out there where you write a CLI tool that only works on Unix most of the time, and some of them on Windows. And in my mind, this is the first time that this probably happens. But the first recommendation is really simple. Just write your program in Unix-based system. So focus on that. Use the simple write slash. Don't worry too much about Windows. It will work. But in most of the cases, it will work. If it doesn't work, it's because it's your fault. So here are a few examples. And what I just mentioned is that if you follow that rule that I mentioned of using the slash, that also includes the required statement. And people don't think about required statement like something that it has some sort of network file system access, but it does. The way that Node.js works, it will try to resolve that by looking into, in the first example for module 1, looking for that module by name. The second one is looking for the module and then looking for a script within that module. And the last one is just using the actual relative path. And as you can see, it's actually using the Unix-based path. But it works in Windows. You don't need to change that in order to get that to work. You just use that, and Node.js will take care of the rest. And also include any kind of operation that is a low-level operation to access the file system. In this example, I'm just constructing this file system path by saying the current their name, and relative to that, a JSON file, and I want to read it from disk. I don't have to go and change this just to make it work in Windows. It will work just like it is there. You don't have to change anything, because anything that goes through the low-level APIs in Node will be smart enough to make that transition and that normalization for you so it can work in multiple platforms. That's really important. The second recommendation is to spend 20 minutes. It will take you 20 minutes to go and learn about the path module. The path module is something that comes with Node.js, part of the core. So just go to that URL, learn about it. I list a few of the APIs here, but it's really simple. Important pieces there, the path.separator. If you ever, and I'm not saying that you need to, but if you ever have to deal with a path that you have to split into pieces to make sense from it, or you just need to know what's the folder name for a particular file or whatever you name it, you should look into these APIs because they will help you to really avoid having to write a program that have to fork based on the operating system. So this is really important. Look at it. In the majority of the cases, you don't even need to go that way, but if you need to, look at it and it will solve a lot of problems. Here's another example. And I review a lot of code, all the libraries that we use at Yahoo. And I see these in a bunch of different libraries out there. People go extreme. Like for variable A there, you just concatenate these 3 pieces. You don't need to. Because again, if you're going to use that path through the low-level APIs to access the file system, it will take care of that for you. So you really don't have to go that extreme. Again, just focus on the Unix-based system, and it will work. So in this particular case, it doesn't matter. They are the same thing. You just have a more complex code that when you look at it, you really don't know what's going on. So keep that in mind. Another reason why Node is becoming very popular for CLI tools is NPM. So how many of you have ever installed something through NPM? Hopefully all. Okay. So NPM is the Node package manager, and it is what allows you to go and install something that someone else push it into the global registry. And the reason why it's so popular these days, and it also implies why NodeJS is so popular these days, is because it's so easy for people to push new code to NPM. It's just one command. Once you have your account set up and you have all the details, it is only one command that you have to execute to be able to share your code. If you feel that the program that you're writing is good enough for someone else, it will help someone else, just push it. Also, since we have this kind of rule in the community that pushing people to pretty much push everything to NPM, like NPM all the things, that means that we have a lot of crap there. Really bad code, but we have really good code as well. So if you feel that your program doesn't matter if it is not good enough for you, if you feel that could potentially be used by someone else, just push it. So don't be worried about the quality. We'll get there. The other thing is that since you have all these modules in a global registry that anyone can install in any platform, it's really simple for people to install it just by doing npm install. And if they pass the flag -G, which means global, that means that they will have something installed at the system level that they can potentially use as a command line. If that module comes with the command line implementation. And the last thing about npm is the fact that in npm 1.0, a long time ago, Isaac introduced this concept of global versus local, which is the best thing ever. Because that means that you don't even have to install things globally to get them to work. As a module or as a CLI, doesn't matter. So you don't need to have sudo access in the majority of the cases. You can install just in a folder, and it will look into that folder for CLI tools, and it will allow you to execute those CLI tools in a really easy way. So another thing that in my mind is potentially the driving factor for many people to go and write npm CLI tools or Node.js programs that are CLI tools is the fact that it uses JavaScript. JavaScript is easy. And probably everyone here knows a lot about JavaScript, or hopefully. But the fact is that if you use the asynchronous nature of the platform, you will have an extra edge in terms of speed. I will try to explain this. So traditional CLI tools in all the other languages are probably trying to do one thing at a time. I need to pick up the file, I need to compile that file, I need to do something else, and then I need to generate a new file. In terms of just accessing the file system and producing or compiling something, which is a pretty common use case for CLI tools. The thing is that while you use Node.js, this CLI tool can do multiple things at the same time. Well, not really multiple things, but it can at least try to distribute the time better and not be blocked by certain operations, like saying, I need to read from disk a file. I just don't need to wait. I just call for it and let me know when you finish, so I will start reading other files that I might potentially need to use, which is pretty good. So you're really using the event loop and the asynchronous nature of the API in Node.js to really speed up the process time for your CLI tools in case that you have to do a lot of operations. So an example of this, YUI is a JavaScript library that has been there for a while. And I think since 2005, we were using and to build the library. The library kept growing. We introduced the website. We introduced the live documentation, API documentation, you name it. Everything surrounding the library was part of the build process. And Java was the de facto library or the de facto infrastructure to write build processes in the past. What happened here is that we really spent a lot of time just building all the pieces to do a new release of the library. And at some point, it was taking hours just to process all the files, push them to CDN, doing all the stuff that are needed just to push a new version of the library. So one of the engineers in the team say, well, I don't care. I will rewrite this engine in Node.js and see how it goes. And it went really well. Just by still using the XMLs that we were using in AND, just by using those, we get a 10x improvement, which means that it was 10 times faster, which means that we were building the whole thing in minutes instead of hours. That was pretty good, but it comes with a cost. And it's a cost that really is not a big deal for many people, especially for small CLI tools, but when you have a CLI tool that does a lot of operation, it gets a little bit tricky. This is an example of a CLI tool, the same that I mentioned before, where it's actually processing CSS and compiling that into something else. And as you see here, you see those messages that are really not ordered in the way that our brain thinks. Our brains will try to just think about steps and processes within each of these steps. But the reality is that the program is doing a lot of things at the same time. So it's kind of difficult. These are just 2 files, but when you have 20 files or 100 files, and all these messages are just mixed, you really cannot know what's going on. So you get into this situation, there are a couple of things that you can do. You really don't want to queue the operations, because that means that you are doing the same that the old libraries were doing. What you can do is instead, you can queue the response of those and only send them to the console when they are really done. Like saying, I'm reading the file and processing the file and writing the new file. And when it's finished, then I just print those 3 messages together. So that's better for the user to get a better sense of what's going on there. So that's one of the tricks that people are doing, and there are a couple of libraries that can help you with that. So just to recap on the CLI tools, and again, this is just to make sure that you guys are aware of all these small details, is that, again, CLI tools getting very popular, Node.js for that, because it's multi-platforms. It might be working on both platforms. If not, it's your fault. As synchronous nature, which means that you get this extra buff in terms of speed, because you can do multiple things at the same time. NPM driven. We all know that NPM is now a success. We have a lot of packages coming up every day, and we're getting a lot of traction on that. And the only bad thing that I can think about it is the fact that you might get into this situation that I just described, getting those messages that might be confusing because of the way that you are printing them. And just a final note, Node.js is definitely amazing, but don't go crazy about it. Still look into other things and try to analyze your situation, your use case, and if it makes sense, to write it in a different language, that's okay. No one will judge you for that. But this is pretty much it. Thank you very much. We have time?
Hi,
5 minutes? Okay. Okay.
Sorry for my shit English, but
Okay.
I really want to know what is the best approach to make a session handler using the server and client side, for which NodeJS and any framework. But what is the best approach for do this?
Yeah, so many people ask that question, and the reality is that there are two groups here. The first group is people who keep thinking about session in a sense that you have this client and server, and the client has information, the server has or maintain information in memory for a period of time. The reality is that the big guys, the big companies are not doing that. Why? Because you cannot scale that. Like at Yahoo, you have hundreds of servers. So you really cannot share data between them. So basically, for every request, we just use the cookie. We use that cookie to identify the user, go to a third layer behind the front end just to get the data that you need for a particular operation that is not related with the first or the previous request that was actually potentially doing a different operation. So that's the real trick here. And in the context of Node and Express specifically, just use something behind the Express layer. Don't use anything at the node level just to maintain data. You cannot maintain any data. I was explicit about it. Don't catch anything at the process level because you have a core. You have potentially a box that have 32 cores or something like that. Each of these cores are probably running a process, which means that you ended up with a machine that is running 32 processes that have no communication with each other. You can find out some tricks, and then you have multiple of those boxes, so you really have a lot of processes that are not connected with each other. So you might end up with a situation where you really have to do things differently. So that's pretty much it.
And about the cookies in the client side, isn't better to use local storage on something like that? Or, I don't know.
Nah, well...
We're still using cookies and
Yeah, we use cookie. I mean, local storage is an option to store some data. I will not recommend to store any actual important data there because it's slow and because there might be some security risk. But even though if it gets compromised, the cookies is also compromised, so who cares about it?
My grandma read my cookies. So.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Any other question? No questions? So I'm from Cuba, so you can speak Portuñol with me. So
about the objects, you said that's not a good thing to use objects in Node.js. It's like I'm pretty confused because most everything is an object in JavaScript. It's not a good idea to just use it for functions, or I don't know.
Yeah, well, what I was trying to reference is that whenever a request comes in, try to minimize the amount of objects that you have to create to respond to that request, because that will help the garbage collector to not have to kick in very often. It will kick in anyways to collect all those, even the request and response object that Express create, they have to be collected at some point. So there are objects that will be created. Just try to minimize that amount of objects. So that's pretty much it.
Like, it's a good idea to store data objects. Like, store data objects is a good idea or not?
I didn't quite get that, but
if I'm getting a list of things from an API.
You don't have a choice. You have to deal with that. So you make a call, you get a JSON, you have this object reference there. You have to deal with it. But there's no other way to do it. But what if you have to go and transform that object into something else and make some transformations and even try to maintain big structures in memory? Especially, I was referenced not to that kind of object, but I was more referenced about the abstraction part of the object, like creating classes, creating objects. Like, for example, in Mojito, we have this concept of controller, model, so we start creating all those per request, which means that you are creating more objects that need to be collected. Instead, probably a better approach will be to create those functions that are global functions, not global, but functions that you have attached somewhere, and you just call them, passing the request and response object, middleware style in Express, and you will be better off because you don't have to create those objects per request. It's only a function that is shared for all requests because it doesn't store any state.
Thanks.
All right, guys, I will be around, so if you have any questions, just approve. All right? Thanks.